Memory is the foundation of our minds, but people say that the most valuable function of our brain is to forget. Contradictory, isn't it? That makes me wonder what kind of people would we be if we didn't forget anything. Would we remain the same, or maybe we're someone else deep down inside? Make yourself comfortable and get ready to listen to another story from the town of Silent Hill. After an extremely successful in all aspects Silent Hill 2, the developers started working on the third part of the game. The first trailer of the game was shown on E3 2002, and in less than a year the game could be easily found in game stores. The very first surprise for the players turned out to be the main hero of the game, or the main heroine to be specific. It's the first time when a player will be able to play for a female character, a young girl called Heather. She suddenly finds herself in a lakeside amusement park. There's rust and monsters around, and Heather is holding a knife. She decides to look around and explore the current location, but when she climbs to the top of the amusement ride, she gets bitten by the trolley. After that, she wakes up in the fast food restaurant in the shopping mall, which is not connected with Silent Hill by all means. Everything she saw was simply a dream. She calls her dad to tell him that she's about to go back home, but at that moment, a private detective, Douglas Cartland, catches her attention. He says that he possesses important information about her that concerns her birth. But Heather doesn't want to listen to him and hides in the girl's bathroom.
A detective? Really? Well, nice talking to you.
She gets out through the window and decides to continue her way back home. Returning back to the mall, she meets a monster in one of the shops that's feasting on a human corpse. Heather grabs a gun she's found on the floor and, in a bout of panic, shoots a whole magazine into an awful creature.
Get the hell away from me!
After a while, our protagonist will meet a barefooted white-haired woman. Her name is Claudia Wolfe, and she claims that the appearance of monsters is a manifestation of divine will and asks Heather to remember her true self, so the rebirth of paradise will happen on the earth.
Remember me, and your true self as well. Also, that which you must become.
Then Claudia leaves, and our protagonist has to continue her unexpected journey through the mall that becomes more and more frightening. But after defeating the first boss, the environment gets back to normal.
What? It's the shopping mall just like before.
Douglas comes out of nowhere and says that he's confused just like Heather and doesn't know anything about these monsters and where they've come from. The girl accuses him of being in cahoots with Claudia. The detective says that he knows who Claudia is since she's the one who hired him to find Heather, but that's it. But Heather doesn't trust his words and runs away into the subway to finally get back home. Of course, there is nothing but awful things like monsters and darkness are waiting for her on the ground. Our protagonist will have to go through tunnels and canalization and then reach the surface and find herself in an unfinished building. She'll manage to get to the nearby building where she'll have to perform a rather long run. On her way, she'll meet one more character, Vincent Smith, a cultured-looking person who definitely knows about Heather more than he should. Also, he behaves quite odd and doesn't seem to be afraid of the terrifying creatures around. That's why Heather decides that he's alongside with Claudia, although Vincent denies it and clearly doesn't have any sympathy for Claudia. But in this dialogue, the name of Heather's father is mentioned for the first time, Harry. And some gamers familiar with Silent Hill games could start suspecting something. When a player gets back home, an unpleasant surprise will be waiting for him. Harry Mason's dead body. It turns out that Heather is none other than Cheryl, or Alessa. She's the baby that Harry Mason, the main character of the first part, took from Silent Hill 17 years ago. After the death of Dahlia, the existence of Silent Hill's cult didn't come to an end. Claudia became in charge of it and organized the search of Alessa in order to make their god rise again. But let's return to Heather's house, where a poor girl is crying over her father's body. At some point, she notices a blood trail that leads to the window and is seen on the stairs that leads to the rooftop. There we can find Claudia, claiming that she had to kill Harry, so the god could be reborn and bring heaven on earth. Heather doesn't want to listen to this nonsense again and decides to shoot her. But suddenly the monster that killed Harry appears, and our protagonist has to fight him. Taking advantage of the situation, Claudia gets away, but claiming that they will meet again, in the town of Silent Hill.
I'll be waiting where all begins. In the town of Silent Hill.
After coming back to the apartment, Heather finds Douglas there, and starts blaming him for finding them, telling that Claudia would never find them if it weren't him. But then she realizes that it's not his fault. He was just a pawn in Claudia's evil plans. And Heather decides to go to that mysterious town of Silent Hill in order to meet Claudia and avenge for the death of her father. Douglas volunteers to help her because he understands that he's partly responsible for what's happened. Douglas mentions that he met Vincent too, and he advised them to find a person called Leonard after arriving in Silent Hill. And since there are no other clues, they decide to follow his advice. As far as I have understood, Vincent contacted Douglas as well, and probably he even offered the detective to kill Heather if something too weird or suspicious started to happen. This theory may be supported by the leads to find Leonard in Silent Hill and the appearance of Vincent in the room where Heather and Douglas decided to stay after coming to Silent Hill. On their way to Silent Hill, Heather tells Douglas the story of her past. This is just a short retelling of the plot of the first game. She tells him about the cult, about the sacrifice of Alessa, about their god and how her dad managed to prevent all this. She's retelling the memories of Alessa that were buried deep down inside. After arriving in the city, this wonderful couple settles into a hotel and decides to split. Douglas will go to Leonard's house and search it through, and Heather will visit Brookhaven Hospital in order to meet Leonard himself. Leonard turns out to be none other than Claudia's father. He used to be a highly placed member of the cult, but then he got mad and he was taken into the asylum. When a player finally gets to the chamber and finds Leonard, he will discover that the poor man is not a human being anymore. So the only way to put an end to this is to kill him. After defeating him, Heather picks up Metatron's seal, the artifact that can prevent the birth of God according to Vincent. Soon enough, our protagonist will return to the hotel room, finding there not Douglas, but Vincent. He says that Douglas asked him to pass along the message to Heather, saying that she has to go to the church, which is situated on the other side of the lake. In order to get there, she has to go through Lakeside Amusement Park and find herself in the same place as she were at the beginning of the game. Meanwhile, Douglas finds Claudia and starts accusing her of her lies. She had told him that Harry Mason actually kidnapped Heather. In return, he only gets another story about God, and that only with Heather's help Claudia will be able to give birth to a new god that will bring peace to this world, without pain, suffering, war, famine and death. But these speeches don't inspire the detective. He says that such a world would be simply boring, and points his gun at Claudia after that. When the cutscene ends, Heather will find Douglas sitting on the floor with a broken leg. He didn't manage to kill Claudia, so now only Heather can put an end to this nightmare. But still, Douglas thinks that the easiest way to put an end to all this would be to kill the girl, right here and right now.
Maybe killing you here is the only way to end this nightmare.
Yeah, you might be right.
But he simply could not pull the trigger. In the church, a player will be met by Claudia. She says that the resurrection of God is near. He'll come to this world and save it from suffering and pain. But Heather doesn't like this plan and she decides to shoot this obsessed woman, although she doesn't accomplish. Girl's body is fulgurated by a sharp pain. This is the fetus of a future god is about to be born. Using this moment, Claudia gets away. A player will have to wander around this place for quite a long time and meet Vincent once again. We'll find out that he's also a member of the cult and believes in the same god as Claudia. But he doesn't want God's resurrection. That's why he's been helping Heather all along. When Heather finally manages to get to the sanctuary of the church, she witnesses the act of arguing between Vincent and Claudia, at the end of which Vincent will receive a traitorous stab in the back.
The time has come. You can kill her now.
You'll go to hell!
Claudia explains that God could only be resurrected through pain, suffering, and anger of the possessor. Death of Heather's father was a great catalyzer, and now all those feelings have reached their peak. God is almost ready to be reborn. Heather tries to use the seal of Metatron to stop the process, but soon she finds out that Vincent was wrong about it, and the artifact can't help at all.
Oh, that's just a piece of junk. What do you think you can do with that?
But then she remembers about the locket, a present from her dad. There is a glaucophatus inside it, the substance that helped Harry Mason to take down Incubus 17 years ago. Heather eats it and, as a result, burps out the fetus of an unborn god. She wants to shred it to pieces, but Claudia interferes, takes the fetus and swallows it, so she could be a vessel for the resurrection.
God is...
Claudia!
Alessa, you cannot kill God. I will burn God.
In the end, Claudia dies, and instead of her, not fully formed God appears, with a face that was quite similar to Alessa's. The final battle is about to begin. This is the end, concludes Heather. It's time for closing credits. Heather, completely exhausted, falls on her knees and starts crying. After the end of all this nightmare, she understands. Harry is completely gone. Thoughts about revenge, Claudia, and monsters have left her head. There is only bereavement over her lost father left. But still, she finds the resolve to stand and continue living. Now we've finally come to the endings, but there are not a lot of them this time. Only one finale, actually. Well, no, there are actually 3 of them, but after the first walkthrough, you'll get only the first one. Heather gets back to the amusement park where she meets Douglas. He asks whether everything's over, when Heather replies, "Not yet. You're still alive," and approaches him with a knife. But in the very end, she turns it into a joke. She asks not to call her Heather anymore. From now on, she's Cheryl. This is the name that Harry gave her many years ago. All in all, happy end, joke about hair color, and finally closing credits.
Want me to use your real name? What was it again?
Cheryl. The name my father gave me.
You gonna let your hair color go back too?
I don't know. Don't you think blondes have more fun?
But the second ending is not that nice. Heather is holding a knife with blood in it, and Douglas is lying on the floor, dead. Maybe this ending represents the prophecy that we could see in the game, the one who will lead us to paradise with blood-stained hands. To get this ending, a player had to finish the game twice, but that's not the only condition. A player has to get 4,000 points through the game. 1 point per every hit that our protagonist gets, 10 points for every killed monster, and another 1,000 for completing a secondary quest. By a twist of fate, Heather will find herself in the confessional of a church, where she will have to decide whether she forgives the woman in another room or not, and it would influence only on getting those 1,000 points, and that's all. The thing is that a player won't be able to find how many points he already has, since there is no counter.
I forgive you.
Thank you, Lord.
There was one more not quite official ending. If a glaucophatus was not taken and players made any other action by accident, God would start resurrecting. The developers even made a special cutscene for this outcome, but there will be no credits after that, only a sign "Game Over."
God! Bring us
And finally, the third ending. This one is naturally comic and is connected with aliens. In order to get this one, player had to kill 30 monsters with a special bonus weapon. In that case, the game would end much earlier in the middle of its original length. Heather comes back home, but it turns out that Harry Mason didn't die. He's sitting at the table and drinking tea with an alien. You can even see James Sunderland behind the curtain. Heather tells her dad about all those horrible things that happened to her on her way home from the mall. Harry gets furious after hearing that. He decides that it's time to be done with the city once and for all. In the next scene, we can see several alien spaceships that burn the city to the ground with lasers. After that, the final credits will start with a karaoke background song, which was performed by the developers, making fun of the main characters. Well, let's start talking about characters, shall we? But before that, just a small off-topic speech. There was a puzzle with the tarot cards in the game. One would think of it as a typical puzzle, but actually it has a great connection with the events of the game. The thing is that in the Lost Memories book, there was a description of every card in the game, and it is connected to different aspects of the game this way or another. It can be a character, place, event, or even an aspect of the developing process. Today we'll only talk about some of them, the ones that refer only to the third part. Right back to the characters. The most undistinguished is Douglas Cartland, who is about 50 years old. At first he was a mere police officer but had retired 10 years before the events of the game and then became a detective. Was married but then got divorced. He had a son from that marriage who died afterward. He was shot while trying to rob a bank. But judging by some versions, he didn't rob any bank. While talking to Claudia, Douglas mentioned that he had killed before and there is a chance that he killed his own son.
You're going to kill me? Is it really so easy for you?
I've done it before.
Then I truly do pity you.
The tarot card which is connected to this character is the Hanged Man. In the original interpretation it means self-sacrifice. In the game, Douglas decides to help Heather, although he puts his own life in danger, for a person he barely knows. "No one's gonna cry over my grave," he says.
You know, you might die too.
That's fine. Nobody's gonna cry over my grave.
The appearance of this character was partly borrowed from actors Ian Holm and Giancarlo Giannini, and his name he's got from Douglas Fairbanks. The next one is Claudia Wolfe. When she was a child, her father, Leonard Wolfe, was bringing her up in accordance with his religious beliefs. That's why through the game, she demonstrated her fanatic faith and dedication to the cult. But also he used to beat her a lot, making her cry and suffer. That's why Vincent thinks this is the reason she wants to resurrect God to free this world of pain and suffering. Besides that, Claudia used to be friends with Alessa Gillespie, and after Alessa was burnt in the ritual, Claudia didn't forget her friend, but on the contrary, cherished the memory of her as a saint. The tarot card which is connected to this character is the High Priestess, because after several years she managed to remove her father out of his post as the head of the cult and became a head herself. After that, she started her search for Alessa in order to achieve her goals, to bring paradise on the earth. When the girl was found, Claudia understood that the only way to make God be born again was to make her suffer. She, even against the grain, had to perform horrible deeds to Heather. Every time Claudia meets the girl, she tries to make her remember her true self and Alessa's memories. According to the first design, Claudia was supposed to be completely bald and covered with tattoos, but the developers thought that it was too extreme for her. Her name comes from an Italian actress from the 1960s, Claudia Cardinale. At first she was supposed to be Christy, but then the name was changed because that name was too cute for such a character. Claudia was modeled to look like Juliana Moore. Some of you may notice that she doesn't have eyebrows. Team Silent purposefully ignored giving her eyebrows to make it hard to interpret her facial expressions. This idea was taken when designers were looking through some fashion magazines. After the events of the first game, the cult of Silent Hill was on the edge of extinction, but it was able to continue its existence thanks to Vincent's money. He's also a member of the cult, but he holds a slightly different view considering beliefs of Claudia. He clearly doesn't like her idea of God's resurrection and all that heaven and earth thing. His main goal is to stop Claudia. All this other world is just a source of new experience and feelings for him. That's why he's desperately trying to help Heather, covering his true intentions with words and lies about helping Heather. But in fact, he desires to fulfill his own intentions. Everything from the way he looks to the way he behaves reveals him as a manipulator and liar. He doesn't want to do his own dirty work, provoking other people to do it instead of him. And he doesn't care whether he puts other people's lives in danger or not. The Moon Tarot card, which relates to him, describes Vincent perfectly. It means something hiding behind a mask, something not to be trusted. Even his look is slightly different from other characters in the game. The size of his pupils is different, and most of the time, one eye is almost always looking at the player. During the game it's not so noticeable, especially in low resolution, but if you manage to take a good screenshot, you'll be able to see this. At first, the way this character looks was taken from an actor Ethan Hawke, and his name from Vincent Gallo. And now only Heather is left. Her card is the Fool. But you shouldn't think that she's the main stupid girl here. The Fool means the new cycle of life. This relates to constant rebirth like Alessa/Cheryl/Heather and her ability to give new life to a new god. Also, this card may mean inconsideration, immaturity, and reckless behavior, because Heather almost always behaves against the reason, relying exceptionally on her feelings. For example, what's the point of going to Silent Hill? Revenge won't bring Harry back, and Claudia definitely wants Heather to come to this town. She could just bury Harry and continue her living, destroying the plans of God's resurrection. But Heather doesn't do it and decides to avenge. She's actually quite antisocial and unfriendly, doesn't want to talk to anyone and maybe even rude. At the same time, she's really trustful and constantly lets Vincent fool and mislead her.
Douglas really said that?
What's wrong? You don't trust me?
Heather was initially modeled after French actresses Charlotte Gainsbourg and Vanessa Paradis in several rough sketches, and the person who gave the voice to this character was called Heather Morris, and as you may assume, she gave not only her voice but the name as well. On early sketches, he had long hair and wore jeans, but after long discussions, it was decided to cut her hair, so she would not be so cute. And in order to keep the balance and emphasize her femininity, it was decided to dress her into a small skirt instead of jeans. Pretty often through the game, Heather will stumble upon birthday congratulations in different forms, but every time the years will change. At first glance it doesn't make any sense, but let's look a little bit closer. So in Silent Hill 3, Heather is 17 years old, it's all clear here. Alessa was 7 years old when Dahlia decided to perform the ritual. After that, her soul split into two and Cheryl was born. Alessa continued her existence in Silent Hill and Cheryl was growing up as a normal girl. So 17 years of Heather, 7 years of Cheryl, 7 years of Alessa before the ritual and 7 years after the ritual. All in all, 38 years old. This is what may happen if you ask a girl about her age.
Happy birthday, dear. Oh, I forgot your name.
Who are you?
Oh, okay, thanks. Happy birthday, dear, who are you? Happy birthday to you. Happy 31st birthday.
And finally, the last interesting fact. During one of the dialogues with Vincent, he accuses her of being cruel and violent, that she likes to beat up and kill her enemies. Heather thinks that he's talking about monsters, and gets a very interesting reply.
Are you talking about the monsters?
Monsters? They look like monsters to you?
Oh no.
From this moment we can make a conclusion that all monsters in the game may be just mere people, the minions of the cult, but Heather sees them as awful creatures. And judging by the conclusion, we may assume that Claudia manages to persuade one of the monsters/followers kill Harry Mason. Well, now the monsters. Usually I talk about them quite a lot, but this time those monsters do not possess any sacral meaning. At least all descriptions from Lost Memories book explain the decryption of the names of monsters. Closer because it hits in close combat. Yes, it has a slightly more delicate meaning. This monster probably reflects the fear before Alessa's mother and Heather's fears to become a woman, because the mouth of this monster has a slight resemblance with vulvar lips. Doublehead because its head is split into two, pendulum because it swings like one, insane cancer because looks like a walking tumor. Scraper because it scrapes its knives, Nurse, well, because she's a nurse, and some other ones. Bosses were not that original as well. Splitworm from the mall, Missionary who killed Heather's dad, and Leonard Wolfe, locked up in the hospital. There is nothing special about them, but still there were a couple of monsters who had some special meaning. The first one is the Memory of Alessa. The encounter happens on the carnival ride in the amusement park. Outwardly, this boss has a strong resemblance with Heather, except she was covered in blood and had black hair instead of blonde. This one was a dark part of Alessa's soul, which got separated after the ritual. Unable to struggle against an unbearable pain, she wanted to commit suicide and give up, although she continued her struggle when she saw Heather. Heather, by the way, didn't appraise her desire to die. She thinks that life deserves to be lived no matter what, and that decision is vividly seen at the end of the game. The last boss also looked like Alessa. In the end, Claudia gave birth to it, so it turned into a shape that Claudia imagined their god should look like. As we remember, she thought of Alessa as a saint, so all thoughts about her created this kind of a monster. Masahiro Ito, the designer, once said that the image of the final boss was really hard to come up with. Creating this one was much harder and took much more time than any other enemy. And now we get closer to the main monster, although a player hasn't even fought him in open combat. This monster will be close to Heather through all her journey one way or another, and turning red valves. But what makes him so special? Who is he and what's his role? His name is Valtiel. He's one of the angels, God's attendant, who has to protect his creator from danger. That's why he keeps following Heather, in order to protect her from enemies that harm her and not yet born God. When Heather dies, he pulls her body somewhere and perhaps resurrects, being kind of the excuse for reloading of the game. By turning those valves, he controls the flow of the supernatural world, making it more intensive or blocking it completely. Another interpretation of those valves is the cycle of God's resurrection. Also, we can track down Valtiel's connection even with the previous games. For example, we can find the same gloves and apron the Pyramid Head wore, and he also follows the main character through the game. Can it be that under that pyramid there is a Valtiel's face hiding? Also, there were several sects in the cult of Silent Hill, and one of them was the sect of Valtiel. They wore white robes, and they also wore red sack-like hoods, again having a resemblance with pyramids. I think even developers don't know for sure whether these guesses are true or not. Of course, true fans would tell more about the meaning of every monster, but I think I'll leave these things for your personal research. But now let's take a look at this game apart from the plot and metaphors. The way of frightening players has changed. In the second part, Silent Hill was tasteless, relatively calm and melancholic. Then the third part literally dived players in hell, performed a terror, both visual and audio. The game was a lot like the first part with all those rusty metal constructions instead of the floor and walls. It's all the same, but now, in different parts of the game, a player could find some pulsing blood coming from the walls. Unseen before, this effect created horrifying dynamic textures that could literally shock players at first. The same thing refers to the monsters. There were more of them, and battles have become much more action-oriented, which even had an impact on the music. Much faster and energetic compositions took place of calm and melancholic melodies. This time Akira Yamaoka decided to go further and added to his music some vocal. He intentionally went to America to perform rehearsals in order to find a specific voice pattern. Mary Elizabeth McGlean was the one chosen from dozens of candidates, with whom Akira will continue working with on the following parts of the franchise. Of course, besides music, he had to create unique sounds for the game as well. For example, he got inspiration for throat singing while watching a TV program about voodoo. Or the origin for the sound that Closer produces was a rhinoceros mixed with digital effects. I'm pointing these things out not only to show you how people are constantly thinking about their games and care about them, but also to show you that inspiration and ideas may come from the most unexpected places. Considering graphics, it hasn't changed much, and was not as obvious as the difference between the first and the second parts. Nevertheless, developers worked really hard on animation, their mimics, and all in all everything that concerns characters. It looked so good that developers even refused to use pre-rendered cutscenes and performed them using the engine of the game. And even now, the close-ups of the characters look really good. If we start talking about some original moments that frightened players, there were some definitely memorable ones. Or this one, for example. A player could find himself in a room with a huge mirror. No signs of trouble. Despite the fact that Heather doesn't like mirrors, after some time the reflection in the mirror stopped moving. The room and the reflection started showing blood stains everywhere. They headed to the bath and disappeared in it, revealing in reality afterward. The reflection could stop moving, bloody stains were coming closer to Heather and she couldn't leave the room because the door could be blocked. A player was simply astonished by such twists and effects. Or another example when Heather happened to visit a spooky house in the amusement park, and the place tries to scare a player with effects that are rather standard for such a place. But considering the town of Silent Hill, where their park is situated, those locations looked original and fresh. And some more interesting aspects of the third part. For the first time the game took place not in Silent Hill right from the beginning, but in a completely different location. Only in the second part of the game our protagonist comes to the Misty Town. There she had to visit places that a player could find in the second part. Brookhaven Hospital, for example, and places from the first part. Also, there were some unique levels as well, like the level in the church, which also has some unique features. The thing is that the map of this place was drawn by a child. Not just stylites to look like a child's drawing. The developers gave a little boy who was the son of a friend of one of the designers some pencils, paper, and opportunity to draw the places however he wanted. And also we can name Robbie, a huge toy bunny appearing here and there, the symbol of the third part. A harmless toy but situated in the decorations of Silent Hill, covered in bloodstains with a horrifying smile, sank into players' minds and probably visited their nightmares several times. All in all, the third part was not only the straight sequel of the first part, but also was quite similar in terms of the structure and plot. They all started in a supernatural world where the protagonist dies. After that, waking up in a diner and meeting the representative of the law, a police officer Sybil and a detective Douglas. Both of them stumble upon some bad working TV sets where the image of Cheryl appeared. Both of them had to fight bosses that looked like huge worms. Also, they had a fight on a carnival ride. And the last level happened to be the plexus of corridors, floors and rooms from the protagonist's past. Also, Heather visited a classroom, hospital room, and Alessa's room from the first part. Both antagonists tried to resurrect a certain god, and both of them managed to do it, but died afterwards. And because of the substance called aglaophatis, protagonists managed to kill the monster and leave Silent Hill. Such parallels are barely seen after the first walkthrough, but there is clearly a very strong connection to the first part. But still there were some references to the second part. From some obvious ones like a poster hanging on the wall, to barely noticeable that would reveal themselves only if there were saved games from Silent Hill 2 on the memory card. In this case, Heather would start making references to the second game. She talked about some letter from a dead wife and could notice a poster with Maria. But the most vivid reference was the scene in one of the toilet rooms. Heather wanted to put her arm into a toilet, but changes her mind in the very last second, saying that only some crazy person would do such a thing. And James did exactly the same thing. Well, he was not completely sane after all.
Who would even think of doing something so disgusting?
One more reference we can hear from Douglas. He said that he had been to Silent Hill before, looking for a missing man who wasn't found after all. It's really possible that the missing man was James Sunderland. There were other references, like to works of Stephen King, the movie called Jacob's Ladder, Session 9 and others. Developers even used references to other Konami games, like a dead body immured into one of the walls. Heather says that this view reminds her of The Black Cat, the story of Edgar Allan Poe, although developers claim that this is the reference to Metal Gear Solid. It's hard not to believe it since there is a military uniform and a gun silencer scene, the essential elements of MGS. You can put the gun silencer on your gun and it will work perfectly. Metal Gear Solid 3 had reference to Silent Hill 3 as well. We could find one of the paintings from Silent Hill 3 there. There was a very funny Easter egg that concerned the Konami code. If you don't know about it, I'll leave a link in the description. If you use it in the main menu, Douglas will be walking around through the game without pants. This looks a bit awkward actually. Some bonus weapons that a player could use after completing the game didn't stay on the sidelines. Players could find a flamethrower, limitless ammo for the assault rifle, and even a lightsaber. Well, we could expect that, but it took off from there. When Heather reached one of the rooms in the sewer, she could drop into the water a rusty metal pipe, which was one of the weapons. After that, a sewer fairy appeared and asked a few questions, and if the answers were correct, a player would not only get his metal pipe back, but would also receive silver and gold ones. Unfortunately, the benefit of using those was minimal, so you could use it just for show off. And the last weapon was not even some super blaster or something. If a player managed to kill more than 333 monsters, the nature of Heather herself changed, so she could fire lasers and energy out of her eyes. And if you add a special costume to this, well, people who are familiar with Sailor Moon at least a bit would get the gist. In this outfit, Heather's lasers were even more powerful, and using those two weapons in the game could open the ending with aliens. By the way, this outfit was not the only one in Silent Hill 3. For the first time in a whole franchise, a player could change the character's appearance. Some skins a player could get after completing some game challenges, some skins could be unlocked if a player used special codes, and some of them were given away by gaming magazines and sites, but most of them were usable only on PlayStation 2. The third part was released in May 2003 on PlayStation 2 and was ported in half of a year on PC. And it was until 2012 when Konami released their Silent Hill HD collection on PlayStation 3. And I promised to tell you about this remake along with the second part. And you should know that both those remakes are disastrous. Okay, players had an opportunity to play in 16:9 aspect ratio, but that's all good I can say about this remake. First of all, the textures were highly cleaned up, so the game lost some atmosphere. It's clearly seen on the asphalt of the game. Secondary, because of some technical difficulties, the mist was not in 3D. Players could observe only some plain sprites of smoke. In fact, there was less mist in general. That's why some cutscenes made player laugh and perform a facepalm gesture at the same time. Just look at this! Now you're clearly able to see the end of the level, and a wire or rope ending on a halfway. And there's more! Both games became too dark, and even with the high settings of brightness, it was almost impossible to see anything. Visual bugs came out, sometimes the music and sound simply could disappear. Poor Marie had a texture of teeth instead of her eye and vice versa. And this fine font was changed to Comic Sans. If you don't know the story of this font, you may look it up on the internet. And I'm not even talking about the music from Silent Hill 2 that was changed for some reason. No, we're not talking about the music from Silent Hill 2.
I got a letter.
The name on the envelope said Mary.
I thought my father and brother were here, but I can't find them either.
I thought my father and brother were here, but I can't find them either.
And there were dozens of different failures, and the icing on the cake became Voicework. The thing is, many actors who gave their voices in the original game didn't give permissions to use their voices in the remake, so the developers had to hire new voice actors. And again, the atmosphere was a victim. Even despite the fact that Troy Baker, who I personally love and respect, was responsible for James, it still didn't work out, at least for me.
No, it's okay. I didn't mean to scare you. I'm kind of lost.
I was just...
No, it's okay. I didn't mean to scare you. I'm kind of lost.
In the very last moment, all voice actors responsible for the original game agreed to take part in the remake, so in Silent Hill 2 a player could choose the variant he liked the most, unlike Silent Hill 3. That's why everyone had to deal with new voices. As a result, 17-year-old Heather sounded more like a 40-year-old woman.
A detective? Really? Well, nice talking to you.
A detective? Really? Well, nice talking to you.
And I'm not talking about the quality of voice acting. In my opinion, it just simply doesn't fit the character. Hereafter, Hijinks Studio that was responsible for the remake shared a piece of interesting information. Like the final code of the second and third parts was lost, so they had to remake damn near alpha versions of the games into HD and plug up dozens of bugs that were coming from everywhere. They released a rather big patch that fixed most of the problems, but even in this case, it is hard to call such a remake a success. But at least players had a chance to play this game, unlike now. At some point, Silent Hill HD Collection was removed from PlayStation Store. Now the only place to get familiar with these games officially is to buy them on Xbox One, although I would strongly not recommend you to do this. Nowadays there are much better ways to enjoy these games, with a better quality of graphics and sound. This is another example of how fans support the games they care about much better than the original developers and publishers. And on behalf of all players who are still able to enjoy these games and even witness the properly improved versions of them, I from the bottom of my heart say thank you. Just like last time, Silent Hill 3 received very positive feedback both from critics and players, although some players expected something greater. But was it really better? There is no concrete answer even now. As we know now, Silent Hill 3 was supposed to be a rail shooter. Can you imagine this now? Most of the fans split into two camps. The ones who think that the third part is the best, and the ones who like the story of James Sunderland more. The third part was not as many-sided as the second part. This is just a simple horror, and not some psychological thriller/horror. But everyone has an opinion, and everyone is able to choose what fits better for him. But still, both these games are by rights considered the classics of horror games and the best games in the franchise, because the next game was quite a disputable and controversial creation, but we'll talk about it next time. Thank you for your attention. See you in several weeks.